The Alley Cat's Kitten. Chapter 1. The Alley Cat. She had not really minded being an alley cat until the kittens came. But everyone who has had children knows that one feels being poor much more keenly on their account than on one's own, and the strawless corner of a deserted shed did not seem a suitable bed for her mother's grandchildren. The alley cat took no pride in her own appearance. Indeed, it had been said that when she was born that her mother, the blooded tortoiseshell of a beautiful home, had never produced such a terrible kitten. She would not have been allowed to live if an accident had not deprived her mother of the others. And as she grew up, even her own parent saw that she was homely. It may be thought that homely cats have no feelings, but this is not the case, for homely cats, like plain people, are sensitive and have even more feelings than others. So one day, when some particularly unkinded remark had been made about the brindled kitten with yellow sides, she left her home and ran away to become an alley cat. She was sorry for this afterwards, of course, like every other kitten that runs away, but she would not go home, and she slept all summer in empty boxes and under barns of people who did not like cats. She visited garbage pails and learned to dash off with the others when the maid opened the kitchen door. She learned to walk on her stomach when crossing the street, and by the time winter came she had cobwebs in her whiskers and looked at everybody out of frightened green eyes. She was naturally a good mouser, but when the weather grew cold, people shut up their barns, and every cat knows that open-air mice who live around unused sheds are very poor eating. But she managed to get along until the kittens came, and then she became desperate enough to beg at back doors and purr for a piece of meat. But some people cannot appreciate even the finest kind of a purr, and the alley cat's purr was hoarse and miserable, like herself. "I once had a good soprano," she told the friendly barn cat who brought her a second joint of a rat, "but I'm out of voice now, being up so much daytimes with the kittens." There were only two kittens, one ugly like herself, and the other very image of her beautiful mother who had never loved her. But the alley cat remembered this and made a point of loving the ugly kitten best. It was soon after their eyes were opened that the coldest weather came, and the alley cat made her first acquaintance with the backyard. She had visited other backyards in her time, but this was very different, because kind children played there, the children of a mother who loved all helpless things. It is true that she did not particularly yearn after alley cats, and was glad when this one refused to be tamed and brought into the house. But she said, "You may put some milk and meat for her out on a coal box, Eunice. She probably knows who she is, even if we don't." So very often after that, when the alley cat leaped with a crash of snow and icicles to the side fence, she would smell a nice warm luncheon waiting for her on the coal box, and go home with a happy, purring heart. But just before Christmas the family went away on a visit and the house was closed. So when the crash of icicles came, an anxious gray face looked over the fence. There was nothing to be seen or smelled that a body could eat. The pleasant barn cat who had brought her the second joint of rat came to tell his friend that a place that he had found downtown behind a restaurant where many things could be had without asking. He was really a very kind cat, although he had but one hole in his nose instead of two, owing to a partition having been torn through in a fight. But she could not move her kittens, and indeed had told him very little about them, fearing that he might not like children. It was soon after this that the gray kitten died, and the tortoiseshell kitten became so thin that there was scarcely room on her sides for all her beautiful tortoiseshell spots. But it was not until the day before Christmas that the family of kind children came home, and that night, when the mother and grandmother were out in the woodshed unpacking holy wreaths, the alley cat came into the yard. The mother of the children noticed her at once because there had been a heavy snow, and her little dark figure showed quite plainly against it. "Mother, that cat is carrying something. I believe it's a kitten," she said, and went to the door to look. The alley cat came with her head held high, for it was a heavy kitten, and her poor little back strained under the burden. But she managed to reach the shed, and laid her baby at the feet of her who loved all helpless things, and turned and went out again into the snow. "Mother, did you see that? Mother, look!" She looked up. The kitten, with pitiful hands, held it to her cheek. Its little nose was quite white with cold, and snow was on its tail. "Do you suppose that there'd be any danger in keeping it?" she asked. "Eunice wants a kitten dreadfully, and has been praying for one every night for a month." "Danger? What nonsense! I'll disinfect it," grandmother said sharply. "Somebody heard that prayer. If the Lord didn't—" And the cats came for Christmas morning. "It's a perfect beauty, even if it's thin," said the children's mother. "But it's pretty young to keep. I kept my babies when they were younger than that, and I'll warrant this cat won't make half so much trouble. Besides, its mother trusted you, so there's nothing else to do." But it was not until after they had warmed some milk for the kitten, and grandmother had wrapped her up in a first aid bichloride bandage, that they remembered how the alley cat had gone out again into the night. "She looked hungry," said the children's mother, with tears in her eyes, "and I know she must have been hungry. But she thought that she wasn't wanted and went away. Oh, poor alley cat. She opened the outside door and called, 'Come back, kitty. Come back, poor kitty, kitty, come back, poor kitty.' But nothing entered except the wind and the snow, and they never saw the alley cat again." Chapter 2. The Alley Cat's Kitten. Eunice and Kenneth were allowed to get up at 6 o'clock on Christmas morning, if they would promise not to wake anyone else. But this was a very funny rule, because when they ran into the playroom where the stockings were hung, mother and grandmother were always there before them, and Franklin, who had pretended to be fast asleep, would give a wild whoop from behind his door. This happened every time, and for years afterwards the striking of a match would set Eunice's heart beating, and she would think, "Oh, it's Christmas, and 6 o'clock has come," when it might not be Christmas at all, and she would have to shake herself very hard to remember that she was grown up. This morning Kenneth was the first to reach the playroom, and so it was he who first saw, but grandmother grabbed him by the seat of his leg nightie and pulled her hand over his mouth, saying, "Wait till Eunice comes." It was then that Eunice saw too, and gave a little squeal of delight, the kind that she always gave when she saw one, although she had never seen one looking out the top of a stocking before, and this one had a lace ruff around its neck. Otherwise the stocking was just as usual, all bunchy, with a queer fat foot made by the orange in the toe, but she could not believe that what she saw at the top of the stocking was true. Bang! went Kenneth on his new noisy present that Franklin had given him, and yow! went the thing in the top of the Eunice's stocking. Then it was true after all. "Do take her out quick," said Miss Wood, laughing. "I'm so afraid that she'll stick to the candy elephant underneath." "There, I'm glad that's over," said grandmother with a sigh. "I wasn't up with her but 7 times last night." "Aren't you going to look at your other things?" said Kenneth, blissfully sucking a hind leg of a sugar dog. "Oh, mother, it has white toes!" Eunice cried. "Say, mother, this is bully!" exclaimed Franklin from the other side of the room where his table was set. Franklin considered himself too old to hang up a stocking now. "My present for grandma's on the breakfast table," Kenneth explained. "It cost 13 cents. Eunice didn't cost but 9. And a white end to its tail," said Eunice. "This book's better than the one that the other fellow had," said Franklin. "And it spit at me! Such a cunning baby spit! Mother, did you hear it spit?" "Well, I believe that I'll take another nap," said Grandmother with a yawn. "I'll go back and get dressed," said Miss Wood. "Kenny, dear, sit off that gumdrop, please, and don't eat but 3 candy animals before breakfast." "Eunice did." "Never mind what Eunice does. It's your business to look after Kenny." "Yes, Mother. I'm coming." And before the children had really looked at all of their presents, it was breakfast time. "What do you name your cat?" asked Franklin over oatmeal. All Franklin's rabbits had names, and could tell each other apart. "I don't know yet," said Eunice. "I think I'll have to wait and see what her yell is." Eunice had a language of what Franklin called yells, in which she talked to all the animals, and the strange part of it was that the animals seemed to like it. Some of these yells were kind of a song, and others appeared to mean certain things which the animals understood. Eunice did not call her new Christmas present Kitty Kitty, but Weegie Weegie, Weegie Kim Mum Sing, which meant come. So in a few days the kitten was known as Weegems, and Eunice said that Weegems had chosen the name for herself. She was a very lonely little kitten at first, and spit at everybody who tried to feed her. But this was only because she missed her own mother and had not yet learned to trust these new friends. She wept nights, and her baby face sometimes had the look of quite an old cat. It was so sad. And she never smiled. Eunice said that afterwards, until I learned how to make that same purr in my throat that the alley cat did. Then she decided that she hadn't made a mistake after all, and that Eunice was her mother. She learned to come to Eunice's door every morning with a little soft "eow," followed by a very fierce "wow" if she was not let in. Sometimes she came so early that Eunice would be sleepy, but there was never any sleep after the kitten was in the room, for she was one of the most dreadfully playful kind. Whenever Eunice moved her toes, she would spring at them, worrying the bedclothes with wide bites and soft thudding hind kicks. And if put down on the floor, she would leap back instantly to dab at Eunice's eyelashes, or tangle herself joyously in her hair, chewing up very hard at the curls became caught in her teeth. She never came to any other door or spoke to any other family. She never came to any other door or spoke to any other member of the family, and seemed to know that she was Eunice's cat. But she hated to be dressed in doll's clothes, and would switch her tail very hard and sit down back too whenever dolls were mentioned. Of course, if she could have seen how sweet she looked with her paws sticking out of a frilled sleeve and her whiskers showing daintily against the dark blue of a velvet bonnet, she would not have minded at all. But she refused to look in the glass when held up to it, and only slanted back her eyes and ears in a bored way that Eunice called Chinese dignity. One day Miss Wood was receiving some very elegant people in the parlor when Weegems came, or rather rolled into the room. She had on a sunbonnet and a pair of doll's riding pants, which were so tight that her tail had to be curled around inside like a watch spring. This gave her a most peculiar gait, as her front legs advanced in stiff hops and her hind legs went to places that her front legs had not planned at all. Miss Wood's back was towards the door, and she did not see Weegems until the senator and his wife began to laugh. Then she pounced on the kitten and carried her out, feeling very much mortified, although she knew that she would laugh herself when the callers were gone. But Weegems had a reason to be glad that she had run into the parlor that day, for it put an end to the most uncomfortable part of dressing up. After this, Miss Wood forbade Eunice to dress the kitten in any garment that was not built to contain a tail. But Weegems still took part in all the plays that Eunice thought of, and even went coasting with her on the blue sled. Her tail always swelled before they reached the bottom of the hill, but it went back to normal size again soon after. And she liked being pulled up the hill on the sled without having to put her pink toes into the snow. One Saturday afternoon, the children all went to see Uncle Tom's Cabin, and came home talking very fast about Topsy and Eva and the real bloodhounds, as big as calves, that chased Eliza across the ice. "There will be scenes from Uncle Tom's Cabin in the nursery today at 4, Eunice announced at breakfast one morning. "It will be the first appearance of Weegems on any stage." Miss Wood said that she would come and bring some ladies who were to call that afternoon, and Franklin came and brought some boys who were helping him bring the new rabbit home. The price of admission was 4 pins, and Cyclone the dog was tied near the door with a pincushion strapped to his back for a money box. Cyclone whined and looked miserable whenever a pin approached, for he knew that he had a sign, "Pay Here," fastened to his collar, and thought it meant that the pins were to be stuck into him. When everyone was ready, Eunice threw open the folding doors between her room and the nursery, and said in a solemn voice, "First tableau. Of such is the kingdom of heaven." The tableau was Kenneth, standing in a high chair, buttoned into one of his mother's corset covers, which reached nearly to his feet. The grown-up audience was wondering what this had to do with Uncle Tom's Cabin, when Franklin said, "Upsaw! That's wrong. This part doesn't come in yet." "It does so," said Eunice, putting her head out from behind the door. "Does so," echoed Kenneth from the high chair. "Ah, you mustn't talk," jeered Franklin. "You're nothing but the nightmare Uncle Tom saw in the last act." "Ain't neither," said Kenneth, bursting a button off the heavily robe into his wraith. "I'm little Eva." "No fair talking," said Eunice. "Mother, is it fair talking to the tableau?" "Let's have the next scene," said one of the ladies, applauding very hard. "Oh, yes," said Eunice, looking quite pleased. "The next scene is Eliza crossing the ice, pursued by the fierce bloodhound." Eunice was Eliza, and Weegems was the bloodhound, and the cakes of ice were newspapers spread across the floor. Eunice, screaming loudly, clasped her doll to her bosom and jumped from paper to paper, then stopped and wriggled a string, and the fierce bloodhound followed with gentle pounces and wavings of the tortoise-shelled tail. But when the audience clapped its delight, the tail grew so big with terror that you could scarcely see any kitten at all behind it, and dashed off the stage to hide under the nursery bureau. And the whole audience left their seats and crawled around on hands and knees with the actors trying to coax the fierce bloodhound out. But he wouldn't come, and so they could not have any more scenes from Uncle Tom's Cabin, as Weegems was to have taken the part of Miss Ophelia and any number of others. So the last tableau was announced as "A Sorrowful Widow Weeping Over Her Husband's Grave." Eunice was the widow, with a red tablecloth over her head, which was the nearest she could find to anything black, and Kenneth was the grave, down on all fours, covered with a yellow lambswool rug. He was dreadfully warm and uncomfortable in this position, but behaved very well until Franklin gave a kind of snort and said, "Ho! Whoever saw a grave with panties on?" Then the grave turned in complete somersault and lay there chuckling wickedly, while the sorrowful widow took her red tablecloth and scolded him. The audience went away then, and Eunice found the Cyclone had slipped the pincushion around his stomach and chewed all the bran out. And Weegems came out from under the bureau. She had to squeeze herself so flat that she howled all the way, and some black, yellow, and white hairs were left behind. But this was because she was getting to be a big kitten now, and could no longer have gone into a Christmas stocking.